He sneered across the table, spitting out, "Don't expect a dime from Dad's fortune." But when the lawyer read her name in the will, his smirk crumbled, leaving only silence, shame, and a truth too heavy to ignore. The morning sun spilled weakly through the blinds of a modest kitchen, dust motes dancing in the pale light. Evelyn stirred her tea with slow, practiced movements, the faint clink of porcelain against spoon echoing through the silence. She sat alone at a table set for one. The floral tablecloth was frayed at the edges, the teacup chipped from years of use, yet she handled it like fine china. Her hands trembled slightly, not from age. She was only in her late 50s, but from the weight of too many years of solitude. She stared at the newspaper folded neatly beside her, but she wasn't reading. Instead, she was lost in memory of a time when laughter filled this kitchen, when her son ran through the halls, leaving muddy footprints on freshly mopped floors, when her husband kissed her cheek as if she were the most precious thing in the world. Those days felt like someone else's life. Now she lived quietly, almost invisibly. She worked part-time at the library, stocking shelves, shuffling books, and offering warm smiles to strangers who rarely remembered her face. She never complained. Complaining seemed useless when life had already taken so much. Yet beneath the calm surface was a quiet longing, a need not for wealth or recognition, but simply for someone to see her, to remember her worth. Hey there, my dear family and friends. If you're already tuned in and ready to enjoy this story, hit that subscribe button and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from, because tomorrow I'll be bringing you another story just as captivating, and you definitely don't want to miss it. Miles away, in a glass-walled apartment overlooking the city skyline, her son adjusted the cufflinks on his shirt. Daniel was 32, tall, sharp-suited, and radiating confidence. His reflection in the mirror pleased him. Sleek hair, jawline defined, the expensive watch on his wrist catching the morning light. He was the picture of success, or at least the kind of success that came easily when one grew up in the shadow of a father with a fortune. Daniel wasn't cruel, but he had learned early that vulnerability was weakness. His father had taught him that money opened doors, and Daniel had believed it with religious conviction. He carried himself with the air of someone who expected the world to bend in his direction. Still, beneath the bravado was a flicker of insecurity, he buried under bravado. His relationship with his mother had withered over the years, reduced to polite greetings and unspoken tension. He often convinced himself she didn't understand him, didn't fit in with the circles he moved through. To him, she was simply part of the past, quiet, meek, inconsequential. This morning, as he sipped his coffee in a mug that probably cost more than his mother's entire grocery budget, his phone buzzed. It was a reminder. Will reading, 2 p.m. Daniel smirked. The number echoed in his mind. $92 million. His father's legacy. His destiny. At the library, Evelyn carefully shelved a stack of worn novels. Her co-worker, a kind woman named Judith, leaned in with curiosity. "You'll be at the will reading today, won't you?" Judith asked gently. Evelyn smiled faintly, though her heart squeezed. "Yes, though I'm not expecting much. Daniel already made it clear I shouldn't." Judith frowned. "He said that to you?" Evelyn nodded, recalling the harsh conversation that still rang in her ears. "Don't expect a dime from Dad's fortune. You don't matter in this." The words had stung, but she had let them pass. What else could she do? By early afternoon, two worlds prepared to collide. Daniel strode into the law office like he owned it, shaking hands, flashing smiles, perfectly tailored suit hugging his frame. Cousins and distant relatives filled the waiting room, whispering and watching him with thinly veiled envy. Evelyn entered quietly, dressed in a simple navy dress she had owned for years. Her presence drew little attention, and she didn't demand any. She moved as if she were a guest in someone else's life, her eyes lowered, her steps careful. But when she lifted her gaze and saw her son across the room, their eyes locked, hers soft, his sharp and dismissive. He gave her a curt nod, nothing more. To Daniel, this was his day, his inheritance, his proof that he had arrived. To Evelyn, it was simply a duty, one more reminder of the distance between them. The lawyer's assistant opened the doors to the chamber. "The reading will begin shortly. Please come inside." Evelyn's breath caught for reasons she couldn't explain. Something in her bones whispered that life was about to change, though she couldn't imagine how. If someone you loved dismissed your worth so harshly, would you fight to prove them wrong? Or would you stay silent like Evelyn? Comment below with what you would do. Perfect. Now we step into the heart of the spark. The will reading that flips everything upside down. This is a slow, heavy scene with lots of sensory detail, silence, and emotional tension. The conference room smelled faintly of polished wood and old books, the kind of room where secrets felt heavier, more binding. A long mahogany table stretched down the center, its glossy surface reflecting the pale faces of those gathered. At the head sat Mr. Hargrove, the family's lawyer. His silver hair combed back with the same precision he brought to every document he handled. Daniel took a seat close to the head of the table, his shoulders squared, his chin raised, a smirk tugging at his mouth as if the outcome were already written in stone. He rested his expensive watch on the table where everyone could see it. To him, this wasn't just a will reading. It was a coronation. Evelyn slipped into a chair near the end of the table. She placed her hands neatly in her lap, eyes lowered, as though hoping to shrink into invisibility. Her dress was plain but pressed, her hair pinned back simply. She looked like a woman who expected nothing, and that was exactly what her son had told her to expect. The lawyer cleared his throat, his voice calm but weighted. "We are here to read the last will and testament of Mr. Charles Whitmore." A hush fell across the room. The air thickened. Every tick of the grandfather clock in the corner seemed louder, dragging out the silence. Daniel leaned back in his chair, confidence radiating off him in waves. His relatives watched with narrowed eyes, some already calculating what crumbs might fall from his table once the $92 million was his. The lawyer began. "To my extended family and acquaintances, I leave tokens of remembrance, as specified in the following pages." Polite coughs, muffled whispers. Names were called, items distributed. Artwork here, jewelry there, small checks to a few charities. Daniel barely listened, his foot tapping impatiently under the table. He was waiting for the real moment. Finally, Hargrove turned the page. His voice dropped an octave, steady but deliberate. "To my son, Daniel Whitmore, I leave." Daniel's smile widened. His body leaned forward, ready to receive. "A sum reflecting both my pride in his accomplishments and my hope that he learns the deeper meaning of responsibility." The figure was announced. It was substantial, but nowhere near $92 million. A ripple went through the room. Daniel's head jerked toward the lawyer, disbelief flashing across his face. "What?" he whispered under his breath. Before he could speak louder, Hargrove continued, his gaze steady on the document. "And to my wife, Evelyn Whitmore." Daniel's body stiffened. For the first time that day, he looked directly at his mother, not with dismissal now, but with a flicker of unease. "I leave the balance of my estate, including assets totaling $92 million. The words landed like thunder. Gasps filled the room. Someone dropped a pen, the sound clattering against the wood like a gunshot. Evelyn froze, her breath caught in her throat. Her name had been spoken, not in passing, not as a courtesy, but as the heir to everything. Her pulse roared in her ears. She hadn't expected this. Not at all. Daniel's face drained of color. His jaw went slack, his confident posture collapsing. He gripped the edge of the table, as though it were the only thing keeping him from falling. His lips parted, but no words came. His father's voice seemed to echo in his head, though Charles had been gone for weeks. Responsibility. Meaning. Family. Words Daniel had brushed off in life but could not escape in death. For Evelyn the moment was surreal. She didn't want the money, not truly. What pierced her most deeply was that Charles had thought of her, had honored her, after years of feeling invisible. She lowered her eyes, blinking rapidly against tears, her hands trembling against the fabric of her dress. The lawyer continued reading, but the room had already shifted. All eyes darted between mother and son, the dismissed woman who now held the fortune, and the once assured heir who sat pale and broken. Finally, Daniel found his voice. It cracked, unsteady, stripped of arrogance. This can't be right," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the hum of the fluorescent lights. But it was right, and it was final. Across the table, Evelyn finally looked at her son. For the first time in years, she didn't lower her gaze. If you were in Evelyn's place, would you comfort your son in that moment, or let him sit in the silence of his own arrogance? Comment below with your choice. The will reading ended, but the tension it birthed clung to the air like smoke after a fire. The relatives filed out quickly, murmuring to one another in hushed tones, casting glances of curiosity, envy, and pity. The heavy doors of the law office closed, leaving Daniel and Evelyn in the echoing quiet of the conference room. Daniel shoved his chair back so violently it screeched against the polished floor. He stood, hands fisted at his sides, his chest heaving. "This is insane," he spat. His voice trembled with fury, but beneath it lay fear, a fear he couldn't name. Evelyn sat still, her fingers lightly clasping the hem of her dress. Her expression was calm, though her heart raced. "Daniel," she began softly. "Don't," he snapped, pacing the length of the table like a caged animal. "Don't you dare act innocent. This was your doing. You what? Manipulated him. Sweet-talked him in his last days. You poisoned his mind against me." Her eyes widened at the accusation, but she did not raise her voice. "I did no such thing." "Then explain it," he shouted, slamming his palm against the glossy wood. The sound reverberated through the room, sharp and violent. "Explain how you, the woman who barely spoke to him in years, ended up with everything while I, his son, his only son, get crumbs." Evelyn inhaled shakily. Her instinct was to retreat, to let his anger wash over her, but something rooted her to the chair. A memory surfaced. Charles's weary eyes in his final days, the way he had held her hand with unexpected tenderness. His words had been simple but firm. "You deserve to be seen, Evelyn. Let him learn what truly matters." Her voice came out soft but steady. "Perhaps your father saw something you didn't." Daniel laughed bitterly, the sound harsh, brittle. "Oh, don't start with the philosophy. This is money, mother. $92 million. You think he was teaching me a lesson?" His tone dripped with disbelief. "Yes," she whispered. "I do." He froze, staring at her as if she had struck him. For a moment neither spoke. The silence was louder than shouting, filled with years of unspoken resentment. Finally, Daniel turned away, grabbing his coat with sharp, jerking movements. "This isn't over. I'll contest the will. I'll prove you schemed this." Evelyn stood then, her voice quiet but carrying weight. "I don't need to fight you, Daniel. Not for money, not for his memory. But I won't apologize for being seen." Her words hung in the air. Daniel faltered, his hand on the doorknob. He wanted to scream at her, to call her a liar, to tell her she didn't deserve it, but her calmness unsettled him more than any rage could. Without another word, he slammed the door behind him, leaving Evelyn alone in the echoing room. She sat back down, pressing her trembling hands to her lap, tears pricking her eyes. Not from the fortune, not even from Daniel's accusations, but from the ache of a mother watching her son slip further away. That night, Evelyn returned home. The house felt heavier than usual, its silence sharp and pressing. She placed the will papers on her kitchen table, staring at them as though they might burst into flames. $92 million. The number meant little compared to the look on Daniel's face. At the same time, Daniel stormed into his apartment, tossing his coat on the floor. He poured himself a glass of whiskey, his hand shaking. His reflection in the glass wall stared back at him. Pale, broken, nothing like the man he thought he was hours earlier. "This isn't real," he muttered to himself. "She doesn't deserve it." should be mine. It was supposed to be mine. But beneath the anger, doubt gnawed at him. He remembered his father's words in their last conversation, words he'd dismissed at the time. Don't mistake inheritance for identity, son. There's more to being my legacy than money. Daniel pushed the memory aside, drowning it with another drink. Yet no amount of whiskey dulled the image of his mother's calm, unyielding gaze across the lawyer's table. If you were Daniel, would you contest the will out of pride, or swallow the lesson and try to understand your father's choice? Share your thoughts below. 2 days passed, but neither Evelyn nor Daniel found peace. For Evelyn, life carried on in her quiet home, though it no longer felt familiar. The phone rang constantly. Calls from lawyers, banks, relatives she hadn't spoken to in years. Everyone wanted something, everyone suddenly remembered her name. She longed to hide from it all, but the estate required her presence. Meetings, signatures, decisions. She had inherited not only money but responsibility she never sought. And responsibility had a way of binding her to her son. At the law office, Mr. Hargrove clasped his hands together, his voice firm. Mrs. Whitmore, Daniel, many of your husband's assets are jointly entangled. To settle them, both of you will need to appear together, at least for the initial proceedings. Daniel stiffened in his chair. He had barely looked at his mother since the reading. Now, forced into the same room, he clenched his jaw so tight it ached. You're saying I have no choice? He asked flatly. Not unless you want to stall the process for months, Hargrove replied. Evelyn glanced at her son, her voice low but steady. We can do this together, Daniel. It doesn't have to be war. He laughed bitterly without humor. War. That's exactly what this is. The following week blurred into an unwanted routine, mother and son arriving at meetings together, sitting side by side while accountants spoke of portfolios, stocks, and properties. Evelyn listened carefully, taking notes, asking questions. Daniel sat stiffly, arms crossed, pretending disinterest but bristling at every word. One afternoon, they found themselves waiting in a bank lobby, the hum of fluorescent lights above them. The room was quiet except for the clicking heels of a teller across the marble floor. Evelyn sat upright, her hands folded neatly in her lap, while Daniel scrolled his phone aggressively, his silence sharp. Do you remember when you were little? Evelyn said softly, breaking the stillness. And your father brought you here to open your first savings account? You were so proud of that $5 bill. Daniel didn't look up. I don't remember. But he did. The memory flickered unwelcome. His small hand clutching that crisp bill. His father's booming laugh. His mother's smile warm and proud. He shoved it down, unwilling to let her see the crack in his armor. Evelyn sighed. You were so certain then that $5 made you rich. I suppose you were right. Silence. Daniel's phone screen blurred as he stared at it, pretending to read. He didn't know why her words unsettled him. The tension followed them to dinner one evening, a required stop between meetings. They sat across from each other in a quiet restaurant, the table lit by a single candle. Evelyn ordered soup, simple and light. Daniel chose steak, barely touching it. They ate mostly in silence, the clink of silverware filling the void. Yet every so often Daniel caught his mother watching him, not with judgment, but with something gentler, something he didn't want to name. Finally he snapped. Stop looking at me like that. Evelyn blinked, startled. Like what? Like you pity me. His words cut, sharp as the knife resting beside his plate. I don't pity you, she said quietly. I worry for you. He scoffed, pushing his plate away. I don't need your worry. Her voice softened, but it carried weight. You're my son. That will never stop me from worrying. The words hung between them. For a moment, Daniel couldn't meet her eyes. Something in his chest tightened, but pride forced him to stay silent. Later that night, Evelyn stood outside Daniel's apartment building, waiting for the driver. The city lights reflected in her tired eyes. Daniel walked past her briskly, muttering, Don't expect me to make this easier. She didn't answer. But when the driver opened the door for her, she hesitated, glancing back at him. His shoulders were hunched, his posture weary despite the tailored suit. She recognized that slump. It was the same one his father had worn in moments of quiet defeat. "Good night, Daniel," she said softly. He didn't reply. But for a second, he paused in the glow of the streetlight, her words following him into the night like a shadow he couldn't shake. Do you think Daniel is beginning to soften under the weight of his mother's quiet strength? Or is he just digging himself deeper into bitterness? Share your take in the comments. The next week brought rain. Steady, relentless, the kind that seemed to wash color out of the world. Evelyn sat in the lawyer's office once more, her hands folded neatly, while Mr. Hargrove sorted through a stack of documents. Daniel slouched beside her, silent, his jaw set like stone. "I came across something," Hargrove said finally, sliding a sealed envelope across the desk. "Mr. Whitmore left this with specific instructions. It's addressed to both of you." Daniel eyed the envelope as though it were a snake about to strike. Evelyn hesitated, her breath catching. She reached for it slowly, her fingers brushing the paper. "Shall I read it aloud?" Hargrove asked. Evelyn nodded. Daniel didn't answer. The lawyer broke the seal and unfolded the letter. His voice, steady and precise, carried the words Charles had written before his death. "To Evelyn, who gave me a quiet strength I never deserved, and to Daniel, who carries my name but not yet my understanding, this is for you both. I know what I've left behind may cause anger, confusion, even resentment. But my hope is that it brings truth, not division. Evelyn, you were my anchor when I was lost. Daniel, you are my legacy, but I pray you will learn that legacy is more than wealth. It is love, sacrifice, and the courage to see those who stand beside you." The room was silent when Hargrove folded the letter. Evelyn's eyes brimmed, her hand pressed to her chest. Daniel's face was unreadable, but his fingers gripped the armrests so tightly his knuckles whitened. That night, Evelyn returned home with the letter tucked in her purse. She sat at the kitchen table, the same chipped teacup beside her, and let memories wash over her. She remembered the nights Charles had come home late, weary from business deals, his temper short. She remembered the loneliness that had hollowed her, the way she had quietly carried their family while he pursued his empire. Yet she also remembered the gentler moments, Charles holding her hand at the hospital when Daniel was born, his eyes filled with awe, the rare evenings when he'd sit with her in the garden, speaking not as a mogul but as a man. Their marriage had been imperfect, often painful, but at the end, he had chosen to see her. Meanwhile, Daniel sat in his penthouse, the rain streaking down the glass like tears he refused to shed. He poured himself another drink but didn't touch it. The letter's words echoed in his mind. Legacy is more than wealth. It is love, sacrifice, and the courage to see those who stand beside you. He thought of his mother, always present, always quiet, never demanding. He remembered being 10 years old, finding her waiting up for him when he returned from a sleepover. She had made hot cocoa, even though it was midnight, just to hear about his day. At the time he'd brushed it off. Now the memory clawed at him. Anger flared again. Anger at his father for writing the words too late. Anger at his mother for seeming to bear them so gracefully. Anger at himself for feeling lost. The following day, Daniel arrived at his mother's house unannounced. Evelyn opened the door, surprised to see him standing there, rain clinging to his coat. "Daniel," she said softly. He held up the letter, damp at the edges. His voice was low, tight. Did you know he would write this? Leave everything to you." Her expression faltered. "No, I didn't know." He studied her face, searching for deceit, but found only weariness. He stepped inside, glancing around the small familiar home, the same creaking floors, the same faint smell of lavender and old books. It felt like stepping back into a life he had abandoned. "You put up with so much," Daniel muttered, almost to himself. "Why?" Her voice caught. "Because I loved him. And because I loved you." Daniel looked at her, then really looked. For the first time, the image of his mother shifted. Not the quiet, irrelevant woman he had dismissed, but someone who had carried far more than he ever realized. The silence stretched. For a moment, something tender flickered between them. But then his defenses rose. He shoved the letter back into his pocket, his face hardening. "This doesn't change anything," he said sharply. "You still don't deserve it." Evelyn's eyes glistened, but she didn't argue. She simply whispered, "Then what would make me deserving in your eyes, Daniel?" He had no answer. He turned away, his chest tight, and left before she could see the storm in his eyes. Perfect, this is the heart-softening act. In Act 6, Daniel and Evelyn begin to share fragile, human moments together. It's the calm before the storm, where healing feels possible. A week later, Evelyn found herself in the unfamiliar grandeur of Charles's study. The estate was still in transition, papers spread across the massive oak desk, but the house was quiet now. The grandeur of marble floors and chandeliers felt like a museum, cold, lifeless, hollow without its owner. She trailed her fingers across the desk, pausing at a photo frame turned face down. She picked it up and gasped softly. It was a picture of her and Charles, taken in their early years of marriage. His arm around her, her smile shy but radiant. She hadn't seen that photo in decades. "Funny," a voice said behind her, making her flinch. "He kept that one." He turned. Daniel leaned in the doorway, hands shoved into his pockets. He looked different, less polished, more tired. His tie was loosened, his hair slightly mussed. He didn't have his usual armor of arrogance, only weariness. Evelyn held the photo close. "Yes, he did." Daniel stepped inside, his eyes scanning the study. "I thought he only kept pictures of himself shaking hands with senators or standing beside cars worth more than most houses." A wry smile tugged at Evelyn's lips. "He had layers you never saw." Daniel walked to the desk and sank into the leather chair. For the first time, he looked not like a man in control but like a boy trying to understand his father. "You know, I don't remember him ever saying he was proud of me. Not once." Evelyn set the photo down gently. "He was proud. He just didn't always know how to say it." Daniel scoffed, but his voice wavered. "That's convenient." Evelyn sat across from him, folding her hands in her lap. "Do you think I didn't want more from him too? Do you think I didn't ache for words he never gave? But sometimes love hides in places you don't expect, in a choice, in a sacrifice, even in silence." Her words sank into him. He stared at the desk, unable to meet her eyes. The days that followed were strangely softer. Circumstances kept them together. Signatures, estate sales, charity discussions. But the sharp edges between them dulled. One afternoon, they walked through the garden behind the estate. The roses had grown wild, thorns spilling over the stone path. Evelyn bent down, brushing a petal with her fingertips. "Your father used to sit out here with me in the evenings," she murmured. "It was the only time he ever seemed at peace." Daniel shoved his hands in his pockets. "I don't remember that. You were always inside, playing video games, too busy to notice." She chuckled softly, a sound he hadn't heard from her in years. Daniel glanced at her, startled by the sound. Something in his chest loosened. He looked down at the wild roses, their fragrance heavy in the warm air. For the first time, he wondered if he'd missed more than he realized, not just about his father but about her. That evening, they shared dinner in Evelyn's kitchen. It was simple: roasted chicken, potatoes, steamed vegetables. Nothing like the extravagant meals Daniel was used to. Yet the smell filled the small space with warmth, something his penthouse never had. Daniel poked at his plate. "I don't remember the last time we ate like this." Evelyn smiled faintly. "I do. You were 16. You complained about the chicken being too dry." He blinked, then laughed, a short, surprised sound. "Sounds like me." Her laughter joined his, soft and gentle. For a moment, the years of distance melted. They were just mother and son, sharing food, sharing air, sharing something fragile and real. Afterward, Daniel lingered at the table, staring into his glass of water. "Mom!" His voice cracked slightly on the word. It had been years since he'd called her that out loud. Evelyn's heart clenched. "Yes, Daniel." He hesitated, his jaw tightening. Then he shook his head. "Nothing. Forget it." But she didn't forget. The single word had been enough. That night, Daniel lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. The scent of roasted chicken lingered on his clothes, the sound of his mother's laughter echoing in his ears. For the first time in years, he didn't feel entirely alone. And that scared him more than losing the 92 million. Here comes the lowest point. Act 7 is where everything cracks apart. The fragile bond they started building in Act 6 is shattered by mistrust, misunderstanding, and sharp words. The following week, Daniel arrived at his mother's house unannounced. His steps were heavy, his face clouded with storm. Evelyn opened the door with a warm smile that quickly faltered when she saw the tightness in his jaw. "Daniel, is everything all right?" she asked. He shoved past her without answering, a folder clutched in his hand. He dropped it onto the kitchen table with a loud thud. Papers spilled out. Copies of financial statements, old trust documents, accounts that Charles had quietly maintained. "Explain this," Daniel demanded, his voice sharp, nearly breaking. Evelyn blinked, picking up one of the papers. "These are Charles's accounts." "Yes," Daniel snapped. "Accounts I never knew existed. Accounts you had access to. So tell me, Mother, how long were you planning this? How long were you setting me up to lose everything?" Her hands trembled as she set the paper down. "Daniel, no. I didn't even know these accounts existed. Charles never." "Don't lie to me." His voice boomed, echoing off the walls. He leaned across the table, his face pale with rage. "You act so innocent, so meek, but all along you were playing the victim while lining your pockets." Evelyn's eyes filled with tears. "That isn't true." "Isn't it?" he spat. "You didn't earn this. You never built a business, never made sacrifices like he and I did. You just existed. And now you sit there, claiming you deserve what he left you." Her chest tightened. The words cut deeper than he knew. She swallowed hard, fighting to keep her voice steady. "Do you think raising you was not sacrifice? Do you think standing beside your father through betrayals, loneliness, and years of silence was not a price paid? I may not have built a company, Daniel, but I built a family. And I carried it alone." He froze, anger flashing into something else. Shame, maybe, but he buried it quickly. "No, you're twisting this. You've always been weak. And now you're pretending to be strong because he threw you a fortune." The silence after those words was suffocating. Evelyn's lips parted, but no sound came. Her hands dropped to her sides, trembling. She stared at her son, her only son, as if she no longer recognized him. Finally, she whispered, "Is that truly what you think of me?" Daniel opened his mouth but couldn't answer. His chest heaved. His fists clenched. He turned, grabbing the folder, shoving the papers back in with clumsy, angry movements. "I should have known. You're nothing but a thief in widow's clothing." The slam of the front door rattled the house. Evelyn stood frozen in her kitchen, the smell of coffee lingering faintly in the air, tears finally slipping down her cheeks. She sank into a chair, burying her face in her hands. For all the pain Charles had given her, nothing compared to hearing her son's rejection. That night, Daniel paced his apartment, the city lights blurring through the glass. The words he had hurled replayed in his head. Weak, thief, undeserving. He wanted to believe them, to justify his anger. But beneath it all was a hollow ache. He remembered her laughter at the dinner table just days earlier. He remembered the photo she had cradled in the study. He remembered her voice, soft but steady. "I loved him. And I loved you." And for the first time, Daniel wondered if he had gone too far. But Evelyn didn't wonder. She knew. Alone in her kitchen, she clutched the chipped teacup to her chest, whispering into the silence. "Charles, what have you done to us?" The fortune that was supposed to bring security had instead ripped open wounds that might never heal. All right, now we slow the pace. Act 8 is about reckoning, isolation, and the choice between pride and vulnerability. Both Evelyn and Daniel sit with their pain, deciding what they truly want. The silence in Evelyn's home was unbearable. Days had passed since Daniel's outburst, yet his words clung to her like shadows. She moved through her small house like a ghost, cooking meals she barely touched, tending to the garden without really seeing the flowers. Every time she picked up the chipped teacup, her hands trembled. She had held her dignity through Charles's storms, but this, her son's rejection, cut her to the marrow. At night, she found herself whispering prayers into the dark. Not for wealth, not for peace, but for her son. "Please," she murmured, her voice cracking. "Don't let this be the end of us." Across the city, Daniel sat in his penthouse, a half-empty glass of whiskey sweating on the table. The view from his window was dazzling, skyscrapers lit like fire, but inside everything felt hollow. The folder of documents lay unopened on the counter. He couldn't even look at them anymore. Instead, he held his father's old watch in his palm, the leather strap worn soft with age. It ticked steadily, a heartbeat in his hand. He thought about Evelyn, her steady voice, her quiet strength, the laughter at the dinner table, the way she had asked, "Is that truly what you think of me?" The question haunted him, because deep down he knew the answer. Well, that wasn't what he thought of her. That wasn't even what he believed. It had been his pride speaking, his fear of being less than his father's golden boy, his terror of losing control. Daniel set the watch down and rubbed his temples. For the first time, the fortune didn't matter. 92 million couldn't buy back the look on his mother's face when he called her weak. 2 nights later, Evelyn sat in her garden, the air cool, stars scattered above. The roses swayed in the evening breeze, their scent heavy, almost bittersweet. She pulled her shawl tighter, loneliness pressing against her ribs. Then, faintly, she heard footsteps on the gravel path. She turned, and there he was. Daniel stood at the edge of the garden, hands shoved into his pockets, his figure outlined by the glow of the porch light. He looked younger somehow, stripped of arrogance, carrying only uncertainty. Evelyn's breath caught. Her instinct was to retreat, to guard herself. But something in his face, raw, searching, made her stay. "Daniel," she said softly. He stepped closer, stopping just a few feet away. His voice was rough, as though unused for days. I don't know how to fix what I said." Evelyn's heart clenched. "You hurt me, Daniel." "I know." His jaw tightened. "I was angry, scared, maybe jealous." He swallowed hard. "I said things I didn't mean. Things I can't take back." The night hummed with silence. Evelyn studied her son, the boy she had raised, the man who had wounded her, standing now with vulnerability etched into every line of his face. She could choose pride. She could let his words stand as the last chapter between them. Or she could open the door to forgiveness, risking more pain but also offering the chance for healing. Slowly, she reached out her hand. Her voice trembled, but it carried steady through the night. "Then choose differently now, Daniel. Choose to see me. Not as an obstacle. Not as someone undeserving. But as your mother." Daniel stared at her hand, his chest rising and falling. The choice weighed heavy, pride or vulnerability, bitterness or love. At last, he stepped forward and placed his hand in hers. The warmth of her touch broke something open in him. His shoulders sagged, his breath shuddered, and for the first time in years, Daniel whispered a word he had nearly forgotten how to say. "Mom." If you were in Daniel's place, would you let pride keep you silent, or would you reach out, even if the words felt impossible? Comment your choice below. The lawyer's office smelled faintly of leather and paper again, though this time the air felt lighter. Evelyn sat beside Daniel, not across from him. Their chairs touched, and though neither of them spoke, there was no wall between them now, only a fragile new closeness. Mr. Hargrove cleared his throat. We've reached the final step of executing Charles Whitmore's estate. Assets will be transferred within the next week. But before we proceed, I want to share a note your father added to the will. Evelyn's hands tightened in her lap. Daniel shifted, glancing sideways at her before nodding for the lawyer to continue. Hargrove unfolded a slip of paper. His voice softened as he read. If Evelyn is still with us, then everything I leave is hers. Not because of money, but because she gave me what money never could: loyalty, compassion, forgiveness. And Daniel, if you are reading this, then know this truth. She is your inheritance too. Not the fortune. Her. Evelyn's breath hitched. Tears welled in her eyes. Daniel's throat constricted, his vision blurring. For weeks he had fought for wealth, status, control. Now, with one simple sentence, all of it seemed meaningless. He turned to his mother. For once, he didn't try to mask himself. His voice cracked as he whispered. He was right. Evelyn blinked at him through tears. Daniel. He took her hand, squeezing it tightly, as though afraid she might slip away. I don't care about the money anymore. I don't want to lose you. Her tears spilled over, and for the first time in years, she pulled him into her arms. He clung to her, his face buried in her shoulder, his frame trembling. The boy she once rocked to sleep, the man who had wounded her so deeply, was now back in her embrace. And she held him like she had never let go. Weeks later, they walked together through the garden behind the estate. The roses had been trimmed, the thorns cut back, the blooms glowing red against the green. Evelyn bent to inhale their fragrance. Daniel stood beside her, his hands tucked into his pockets, quieter than she had ever known him. Do you think he'd be proud of us? Daniel asked suddenly. Evelyn straightened, smiling gently. I think he'd be relieved. Daniel chuckled, then grew serious. I can't promise I won't stumble again. I'm still learning. She touched his arm, her eyes kind. That's all I ask, Daniel. That you keep choosing to see me. To see us. Not the money, not the anger. Just us. He nodded, his throat tightening. I will, Mom. They stood in silence, the roses swaying gently around them. For the first time, Daniel felt at peace. Not because of $92 million, not because of legacy or wealth, but because he had rediscovered something far more valuable. Family. Love. Belonging. That night before bed, Evelyn placed the chipped teacup on the windowsill, where moonlight kissed its cracks. She whispered softly, as if Charles could still hear. They tried to break us, but love won. And in the stillness of her home, Evelyn finally felt whole. Do you believe love can heal even the deepest wounds left by pride, anger, and betrayal? Comment your thoughts, and maybe share a story from your own life.
Thank you for staying with us until the very end of this video, and I'm confident you enjoyed it. We've got plenty more exciting and heartwarming stories waiting for you. Just click on the image on your screen to watch the next one.